First of all, hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Scope 3 reporting. My name is Christian, and I will be the facilitator of today's event. I work here at CEMAsys as a sustainability consultant, and today I'm speaking to you from Oslo, Norway. And with me, I have Abby, Sonia, and Edward, who will share with us some of their experiences with Scope 3 reporting in just a moment. And I will present them in a few minutes. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide. So before we start, I just want to go through our webinar house rules. Please keep your camera and microphone off during the entire course of the presentation. Any questions you might have can be sent to us via the chat function, and my colleague Claudia will answer them as we move forward. So we will also record the presentation so that those who could not make it today can watch the recording another time. So those were the house rules of today. And in front of you, you'll see the agenda. So I am currently doing the introduction, and after me, we'll hear from Edward, who will do a short introduction to what Scope 3 reporting is, and a little bit about what's important to think about when reporting to Scope 3. Following up is Abby Lin, who will talk about data collection in a complex supply chain. And then it's Sonia Petzold, who will talk from Stokke, who will talk about how to ensure accuracy in Scope 3 reporting. And if we have time, we'll do a short Q&A at the end where we'll try to answer some of the questions that come up in the chat. So that was all the formal stuff. So let's get into the interesting stuff. So I consider myself to be a numbers person, very much so. So I love numbers. And I would like to kick this off with some statistics just to set the scene. So the consultancy firm McKinsey has shown that in the consumer goods industry sector, 80% of a company's emissions come from indirect sources in their supply chains, meaning most of their emissions are not generated from in-house operations, but from further down their supply chains. In light of this, a CDP report revealed that only 1/3 of businesses are taking action on this and engaging with their suppliers. So the consumer goods industry is facing a huge environmental challenge. To meet the EU climate targets, industry will have to more than halve its greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. At the same time, consumers are pushing for more sustainable business practices. According to Cone Communications, 88% of consumers are more likely to be loyal to companies that demonstrate strong social and environmental responsibility. And this is all about the consumer goods industry. But this sort of trend is not specific to that particular industry. We see this again and again in industry after industry. And this may seem like a daunting challenge ahead, and that is also why it is so important that we act. So I just want to take this opportunity to say that I'm so inspired to see so many of you engaging with us today. All of us are very passionate about sustainability, and it makes me truly, truly happy to see that each and every one of you has chosen to be here today. So with that, I'm going to move on. And we are, of course, here to talk about Scope 3. But to make sure that we are all on the same page, I just want to mention that we have 3 emission scopes when reporting greenhouse gas emissions according to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Scope 1 emissions are the direct emissions that come from sources controlled or owned by the company, such as fuels or refrigerants. And then we have scope 2 emissions that are the indirect emissions that come from assets that the company controls or owns, such as electricity or district heating. And at last, we have scope 3 emissions that are all the remaining indirect emissions that are present in a company's upstream and downstream value chain. And for many, including professionals, scope 3 reporting is often hard. And I think I will leave it with that when I let someone else take the stage. First up today, I want to introduce to you my dear colleague, Edward. As a sustainability consultant, he has helped companies with carbon accounting, setting science-based targets, CDP reporting, TCFD analysis, and so much more. His clients find themselves in many different industries, such as construction and finance, to just mention a few. And he also holds a master's degree in leadership and change. So, Edward, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian, for that warm introduction. My name is Edward, as Christian mentioned. And first of all, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this webinar today. I am going to talk about Scope 3, and I'm going to talk about what Scope 3 is, how to calculate your Scope 3, and also why it is important to calculate your Scope 3. But first of all, I'm going to give you a short introduction to CEMAsys. So CEMAsys was established all the way back in 2007, specialized climate change and sustainability consultancies in Norway. We employ a quite unique two-pronged approach towards sustainability, and that is consistent of our system solutions combined with our core services where we have our expertise. And this two-pronged approach is illustrated on this slide. We can see that first of all, we have our system solutions. They are 5 in total, and they are web-based, and that means that you could enter them from all around the world as long as you have internet. The one all the way to the left is the one that is relevant for today, and that is carbon footprint, because this module is tailored according to the greenhouse gas protocol, where we find scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. In addition to that, we have our core services, and this is where our expert consultants assist our clients in answering to these frameworks. And we can mention a few of them, the GRI, the CDP, the TCFD, EU taxonomy, greenhouse gas protocol, and of course, science-based target as well. And if we look at the bottom right corner of this slide, we can see that we have more than 600 active clients, whereas 1/6 of them are listed companies, and they stretch across more than 70 different countries. So that was a bit short and sweet about CEMAsys, and now let's move over to the main part of the presentation, which is the Scope 3. So Scope 3 is represented on the left-hand side of this slide, and we can see that Scope 3 can be split into these 15 categories that combined constitute all emissions from cradle to gate. In addition, these 15 categories include emission sources from the value chain of the company. And further that, also as Christian mentioned earlier, these 15 categories is divided into the upstream and downstream activities. And not all these categories will be relevant for your company. And it's also worth noting, as also Christian mentioned, that the process of gathering data and calculating Scope 3 is much more demanding for a lot of companies than Scope 1 and Scope 2. However, a good suggestion is to start with the low-hanging fruits. And then you can continuously develop your Scope 3, so starting with the easiest of these categories and then continuously develop and include more and more of these 15 categories. And just to mention a few of the low-hanging fruits that are often for a lot of our clients, we can see that number 5, waste, number 6, business travel, and number 7, employee commuting are often low-hanging fruits. And a low-hanging fruits is a category that you often have consumption or activity data for, and it's easy to start the calculation. However, some of these categories can be more demanding for some companies than others, but here CEMAsys has great experience in assisting our customers with the data gathering, and we also have API solutions for automatic data gathering. Further, it is worth noting that scope 3 is someone else's scope 1 and 2. And yes, that means that scope 3 is in fact double reporting. And just to give you an example of how this works, if we look at the category number 4, upstream transportation and distribution, when we think of a transportation company that drives around and distributes goods to a lot of different places, they are reporting this in their scope 1 and their scope 2. And in addition, when we are in fact ordering these same goods to us, we are in our scope 3 calculating the same as they do in scope 1 and scope 2. So that's just to stipulate the double counting of scope 3. And also, I would like to mention the importance of reporting on scope 3. This is further indicated through the other frameworks. As we can see, it is quite intertwined in the other frameworks. And we see that it is highly important in CDP, it is highly important in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and Science-Based Target, to name a few of them as well. In addition, we have the new EU requirements, the CSRD, with the ESRS, which are the standards for the CSRD that makes scope 3 reporting mandatory from 2025. That is reporting for the fiscal year of 2024. And now we're moving over to the famous CEMAsys ESG onion. And this is not a step-by-step guidance of how your company is supposed to do your ESG journey, but it is more or less a suggestion. In addition to that, it also illustrates and indicates the intertwining of the different frameworks. We can see that a lot of our clients, they start in the center of the onion with a GHG, that is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, where we find carbon footprint accounting and scope 3. And when you have accounted for and reported your scope 1, 2, and 3, you could start to look at the hotspots. Where do you have the most emissions? Where could you start to reduce, how to reduce, and actually start the reduction initiatives? And this brings us directly over to number 2 here, which is science-based target, and that is science-based target initiative, and that is about reducing your emissions in line with the Paris Agreement and 1.5 degrees pathway. And moving from science-based target and reduction initiatives, you could go over to analysis of risk and opportunities in TCFD, further focusing on sustainable finance and steering your capital towards sustainable activities. And then the uttermost layer of this onion, all around the onion, is the GRI and materiality, and that is identifying material ESG topics. So as I mentioned, not a step-by-step guidance, but also indicating the intertwining of all these frameworks and also the importance of actual reporting on scope 3. So moving from that over to something that is in fact a step-by-step guidance, or at least a suggestion of a step-by-step guidance of how to report on scope 3. We start at number 1, defining boundaries. If you have already reported on scope 1 and 2, you have probably already defined your boundaries. But for those who have not started that journey, I would just talk a bit about that as well. And we can see that you could divide either between equity share or the control approach. That is what you can choose. The equity share is where a company accounts for greenhouse gas emissions from operations according to its share of equity in the operation. On the other hand, the control approach is where a company accounts for 100% of its greenhouse gas emissions from operations which it has control over. And the control approach can further be divided into both the financial and operational control, but I will not go further into that today. I would rather move to step number 2. So after defining your boundaries, you could start your scope 3 screening and also a workshop. And this is to identify all significant scope 3 categories and subcategories. A good suggestion or a great thing to do here is to gather a lot of people from around the company, from different divisions, sit down and talk through the 15 categories. What do we think are the low-hanging fruits? Where do we think we have activity data, consumption data, and so on, and start to figure out what you should report on. When you have this set in place, the categories that you would like to report on, move over to number 3, which is the data collection. And the data collection is where you collect all the relevant data. And here it is also a good thing to mention that this entails the importance to have a good dialogue with your suppliers, because this is where you get your data. Then we could move over to number 4, where it is analyzing and calculating your data. And according to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, we have some methods for doing this. I'm going to talk about 4 of them now. The first one is the supplier-specific data method, and this is a method of actually calculating data based on what you get from your suppliers. So if you are, for example, to report on business travel, you could directly contact your travel agency and see if you're able to get the total report of ton CO2 equivalents. And if you get that, you could put that directly into the scope 3. Then the second most preferred method is the average data method, and the average data method, that is where you use your consumption data, and that could be liters of fuel, it could be kilowatts per hour, kilos, or cubic meters, and you calculate this with an emission factor, and you get ton CO2 equivalents. Then we have a less preferred method, which is the spend-based data method, and this is where you calculate your emissions based on your financial figures. The last but not least, we have the hybrid data method, which is a combination of some of the methods mentioned above. And then when you're done with this, you have probably maybe a full scope 3, or you have a scope 1 and scope 2 and the significant categories or low-hanging fruits of scope 3. And then it is time to define the next steps. What should be the next steps of your reporting? Should it be to continuously improve and add more and more categories until you have a full scope 3? Or is it time to look at the reduction potentials and maybe come up with some reduction initiatives? That is a leading question, and it's up to you to figure that out. This was what I was going to talk about today, and now I hope that you are motivated to start your Scope 3 reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Edward. Now that we are all experts in the theory of Scope 3 reporting, I think it's time to hear from the industry. So our next speaker today is Abby Lin, who is the Chief Compliance Officer at Crayon. And Crayon is a provider of software asset management, cloud and volume licensing, and associated consulting services. And she has over 15 years of international ethics and compliance-related experience, and has worked for large multinational corporations such as Microsoft, KPMG, and Yara. She holds a double bachelor's degree from UCLA and a master's degree from the University of California. And I believe her being a dual citizen and having 2 passports allow for an easy commute between Norway and the US. So a warm welcome to Abby Lin.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here. As mentioned, I'm responsible for risk and compliance at Crayon, but I'm also responsible for sustainability, which is a relatively new topic in the journey that we're under right now. So I'll share a little bit more about our ESG journey that we've had, along with our carbon reporting. We've improved a lot from having a non-existent ESG report last year to being named one of the top rising companies around ESG reporting in Finansavisen related to the ESG 100. And I think one of the key abilities to be able to make that jump was our carbon reporting. But having said that, we are not professionals in this. We are definitely learning along the way, and we have had challenges along the way. So I really want to make this honest for everybody who's starting their journey in terms of learning from maybe the mistakes that we've made and the challenges and the opportunities in the way that we're changing our reporting moving forward to support this process. So I can just jump in. I don't think I need to go through this slide a lot. There's a lot of attendees in this, and I think we're all understanding the importance of carbon reporting and also the increasing attention around sustainability globally. We see that there's a regulatory push. We also see the more and more as a stock listed company in Oslo, we see investors asking a lot more about sustainability reporting. We also see our customers and our government entities, our government customers especially asking and making requirements around bids and wanting to see what are we doing in terms of environmental protection, so that we see there's a lot more pressure around sustainability, which is good because it helps force the companies and also see the opportunities related to these mega trends that are coming. So within Crayon, we have one of the reasons why we were able to make a jump so quickly is that we've had very high leadership attention to this. I sit within the management team. We have a new CEO and a new CTO that are passionate about sustainability personally. So that made it a lot easier to also set up an ESG board. We have a board committee focusing on ESG. So that also helps with the buy-in in terms of moving quickly and fast and putting a lot of investment towards this. We also see it as a competitive advantage. We see ESG not as a requirement because of a regulatory thing that's coming in 2 years, but something that actually will be good for business moving forward. So that's also something that we want to be ahead of this and not actually be forced by the regulation, but see this as a competitive advantage and an opportunity moving forward. And we also see this, as I said before, as a requirement for customers, especially with our European operations moving forward. So as I said, this has been a journey. We went through our first reporting process this year. Crayon is in more than 45 countries, and we are also decentralized, which also makes it a little bit of a challenge in our ESG reporting. In our first year of reporting, we learned a lot. I would say one of the things is that we started with volunteers. We had across our organization, we had 40 people, and then every country raised their hand saying, we're really interested. We want to see carbon reporting happen. We're going to help support you on this. I think one of our challenges in doing that, it was great to have that enthusiasm, but they didn't necessarily have the technical skills to pull the data. You can ask for the data, but in terms of actually evaluating it, finding its right data, answering the right questions from the finance team, we found that to be a little bit difficult moving forward. And we ended up having to use external support like CEMAsys to help guide us through the process, also given our short time that we had to collect the information. So we did make it through our ESG reporting. We were able to report on scope 1, 2, and some scope 3. Having said that, I would say that it was a great learning process, and we now, having gone through that process, we've hired a person, Andrew, who's on this call, to actually look and evaluate at what we've done, how we reported last year, and how we can improve for next year. And I'll share some of the analysis that he's been doing on our reporting. It's still work in progress, so not all the numbers are official or accurate, but they will give you an indication of some of the challenges that we've had around scope 3. So I said, complexity, or more than 45 countries. We are a decentralized company. We have different types of data sources, and then we have different ways of estimating the methodologies used for it. And then also the amount of time spent, between collecting scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. We also measure that to better understand the impact on business to collect this information. So the different data sources, for scope 1 and 2, it was more straightforward. The data sources were the same. You can go and look at invoices. You can find the information relatively quickly. For scope 3, we found that there are many different types of data sources that came in, which made it, depending on which country there was, for both waste, it was very difficult to find. A lot of the companies that we work in and a lot of the countries don't collect this information. So how do you do this with estimations? Other ones, especially around business travel, because we don't have a centralized business booking system, we had to go individually in the country and try to find this information. And that proved to be actually really difficult. So difficult that we're looking moving forward, how can we help centralize this to make it easier for the business moving forward? Some of the other things was we realized after the fact is that the methodology might have been different because the data sources were different. And we did it in such a short time that we realized that there are different methodologies, if you see on the right, in terms of how we tried to calculate the figures. And that made it, I would say that's not ideal. I would say in best practice, you would have a consistent way of working. And that's also something that we want to make sure moving forward that we have committed to science-based targets. So we're going through that process of, and to make sure that we are very consistent in the way that we work in terms of the definitions moving forward. One of the things that we actually saw was that scope 3 is the most complex compared to scope 1 and 2. I think that's why there's a lot of people in this call trying to figure it out. I think one of the reasons why we had challenges was because our travel has been decentralized. I think, looking into like for companies that have a centralized travel booking system, I think it will be easier for you to collect that information. And that's something that we're considering internally, because we actually see the hours, the amount of time the business had to go through the expenses trying to figure out, especially during the COVID time where maybe you would book a travel, but you wouldn't travel because it was canceled. How do you find out what actually happened? And that actually took the business a lot of time. We didn't anticipate that it would actually take the business that much time to do the scope 3. And what we see, even though these are preliminary, is a results, and we have more countries that we're following up on this, we do see that scope 3 takes the most time. And that's something that we're trying to better understand how to support the countries to make sure. Same thing with waste. We find that that's actually really difficult, and we have to do some estimations on that. So how can we help support them in terms of finding this information and giving them more guidance around that? So this is a summary of what we've had in terms of the data, and making sure the data sources can be very different country to country. Also trying to identify the right data sources for them was difficult. The methodology was also, we realized, was not consistent as we would like to be. I think part of our journey here is kind of progress, not perfection. And we're trying to get to the perfection stage, but just trying to go through this process forces you to rethink and improve every reiteration that you have. So that's something that we're trying to do. And then we also see that for business travel, we actually had good quality data. It was just actually difficult to find. And it was quite time consuming to be able to find this data because we had a decentralized travel booking tool. And at the same time, waste was difficult to find and was based a lot on estimations. And we're trying to find a more accurate representation for that moving forward. And also just in terms of the time consuming. I think we underestimated going through the first time how much time it took for some of the subsidiaries who might not have the experience in carbon reporting or really understand it, for them to be able to pull out the data and review it. And that's something that I think, what we're really making sure of moving forward is that we're able to support the subsidiaries as much as possible, trying to do as much as we can centrally, pull the information as we can centrally, and have a consistent way of working to be able to support them moving forward. So scope 3 is definitely more challenging, than scope 1 and 2. So in terms of our next steps, I talked a lot about that already, is to have a more consistent system. We have somebody working full time on this to make sure that we collect it well moving forward. We do plan to expand our scope 3 categories to, business commuting, working from home and office, and also purchase goods and services moving forward. We also want to, have more quality around our carbon reporting, because we have committed to the Science-Based Target Initiative, and we will be going through that assessment process where they'll be checking exactly how we're doing it. We also see the regulations coming relating to having your ESG report audited. So we also want to make sure that we have a consistent way of working and to be able to prove that we have a really solid way of collecting moving forward. Also, not just to forget about the data collection part of it. I think there's also something that, people don't, I would say, expect in this process, is the human nature of it. Working in 45 countries, I would say that it's not consistent in, within Europe, there's a big push around sustainability. But in other countries or other markets, there is no talk about sustainability, and there's no interest in sustainability. They don't have the regulatory pressure or understanding of it. So how do you actually explain to all of the different countries or all of the different finance, you need to stop, you need to go through and dig through all of your, expenses and look into this and spend a lot of this additional time that maybe they didn't allocate in their regular business for. So it's a lot of change management through the process, I think, that you have to recognize. The good thing about it is that we do have leadership commitment at the top. So they understand this is kind of a must to have, you have to do it. But I do think that we doing this at such a short time frame that we had, I think, if we were to do it again, and it's something that we're doing now, is we're really taking the time for the stakeholder management and to talk through it, give little pieces of information and support, rather than trying to, get this through in such a short time. So I think the earlier you can start, the earlier you can communicate about this, having workshops, building capacity, talking about it more and more, and explaining why it's important, even going to the point of, we have Andrew has made a presentation about the EU regulations, and even showing how does that affect our stock price and what is coming, giving that background information before even jumping into the carbon reporting. really helps in terms of the collaboration and their willingness to help you. So I think making sure that you give a little bit more of a background information on why you're doing this, not just because you want to do it and you need to do it, but actually saying like, why is this helpful for you? Why is this good for business for you, even if you might not have the regulatory pressure? So that's something that we are focusing on moving forward. So, and then I mentioned this is like, we see the CSRD coming into regulation. We want to be ahead of that. We're really working on getting a more, I would say, mature carbon reporting process in and getting ready for SBTI. We also have, recently earned the ISO 14001, which is the environmental management system globally, in over 57 offices. So we are starting to set the structure around our ESG strategy there. And that was it. Happy to answer any questions now or later on.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. We'll just get the camera up working again. That was a great presentation, and you talked a lot about time, because Scope 3 reporting can be very time consuming, as we all know. And I think that's why it's important to have some good systems in place that can cut time while ensuring quality. And on that note, today's last speaker is Sonja Petzold. Sonja works as a sustainability manager for Stokke, a Norwegian manufacturer of children's furniture and accessories. She has 10 years of experience as a project manager in the food industry and 5 years of experience in the sustainability space, working on carbon emissions, responsible sourcing, and certification processes. And just before you start, I just want to remind everyone that we will have a short Q&A at the end of the session. So all your questions that you post in the chat, we'll hopefully be able to pick some of them at the end. So with that, Sonja, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm Sonja. I work for Stokke, the Norwegian manufacturer of children's equipment. So you might recognize some of the products behind me. I am now speaking to you from our head office in Ålesund, Norway. So Stokke has started the journey to calculate corporate carbon footprint in 2021, doing the first calculation for the complete year of 2020. This is a part of our larger sustainability strategy, which is based on 5 main areas or pillars, one of them being a carbon reduction or greenhouse gas emission reduction, aligned with the science-based target. And this is very important area where we want to achieve a meaningful impact. So of course, the journey there is long, right? It's not something you can achieve in 1 year. And it starts with the calculation. And I would like to talk today about the importance of having accurate data established throughout the whole process. So this is just a very simplified way how we look at it. The carbon accounting in scope 1 and 2 and 3. So at least it's when you think about it, it's really about the products. So the products in our case are the children furniture and equipment, the materials they are made of, and how they are manufactured, how much energy is used for their manufacturing, the transportation of the product. So from the manufacturing sites to the warehouses, and from the warehouses to the point of sale or to the consumers. Then, of course, our offices, we are spread globally in 8 offices, so not such a large complexity yet, right? And we have to consider there the energy we are using, the electricity, the heating, the AC, and the company cars we are leasing or owning. And of course, as Abby has mentioned, business travel. So this is also part of it. And we are covering right now most part of the scope 3. Of course, there is some small part still missing, like the commuting, which we want to include in the calculation of 2022. It's important to mention that our manufacturing setup is in a way it's third-party manufacturing, so we are not owning the production facilities, so which adds some more complexity in getting data in. So how do we go about it to get the data in? So we start early in the year. We, of course, have to wait until the fiscal year is over, and we have from our sourcing and production department to have the purchased goods numbers ready, which is usually end of Jan. So we start really early, beginning of February, with a kickoff meeting with all the relevant function, which in our case is controlling sourcing and production and logistics. So it's around 20 people. And we have a meeting where we discuss how we go about it, who is doing what, and the time frame for it, of course. And then the time frame, the good news, the time frame is getting shorter from year to year because, of course, you get some experiences, you gain knowledge about how to best pull data from different sources and put them together. And also we are having templates ready already in this meeting. So we work with simple Excel spreadsheets for every area. So we would have one for the offices where we capture the electricity and all kinds of energies and the vehicles. We have one for the product and our suppliers. So it's a product and energy in the production area captured together. And we have one for logistics. So it's all in all, we are working, then the real struggle starts to get the data in, right? So first year, I would say it's very crucial to make sure that everybody is understanding the importance of accurate data. I guess some of you might have the privilege to be able to pull the relevant data on, for example, products from system you are using for material or product management. Unfortunately, even though we have a system, it's not working with the metrics we would need for carbon accounting, so with weight. That's why we have to really go product by product and look at the materials and try to, get the data on how much does each part or each material in the product weight. So in some products, it's easier. In some products, like our stroller, when we have a lot of materials there, it's more complicated, but it's possible. Of course, we also do estimates. We do not disassemble the stroller and weight all the 78 parts. So we try to capture together the material. So all aluminum parts or metal parts, all plastic parts in different kind of plastics and so on. So why is that important? I think that you have to really understand that the more accurate data you get into your calculation, the more accurate are the results. And the results are really showing you where you have to act in reduction. So what are the main causes of greenhouse gas emissions in your supply chain or in your company, right? So that's why you don't need to weigh every little screw or whatever little part you have, but it's very important to understand that the accuracy does matter. So how we did it was really after the first year to involve everybody from this group to the evaluation of data. When the data were calculated by CEMAsys, we had a session when we were looking at the data, and we had to iterate quite a lot because it turned out, of course, there were some small mistakes, errors, and just not very correct data. So through our iteration process, when we fine-tuned the data and really looked into products which looked a bit off in terms of emissions, we could increase the quality of the data a lot. The good news is also when you do it once, then you can use it the next years. And of course, we have some product changes. We have new products coming in, so those you have to capture again, right? But the majority of your data points would be valid the next year as well. So in terms of how much time you should schedule for this, usually we allow then the whole month of February and part of March to really get the data. Of course, we have to respect also our production facility and their schedule. So when we request data from them, such as using of different types of energy and fuels, it's not the highest priority, so we have to allow some time to come up with this. So we usually are somewhere between 4 and it used to be 8 to 12 weeks. Now we are more into 4 to 6 weeks. So it's very good. So after 6 weeks, we try to gather all the data in the different Excel sheets. In some areas, it's much easier. Like in logistics, we are working with big providers who actually have their own data captured pretty well. So we get immediately the spreadsheets filled in with the right data. Some of them even are providing already the CO2 emissions calculated. But of course, there are also areas, as Emmy mentioned, business travel. We unfortunately also have a decentralized system for business travel. So we have to pull the data from different databases, which is a bit, more time consuming, of course. But based on our size, we still can cope with it pretty well. So then, of course, I have some results, and this is no surprise. I guess that's pretty much true for anybody who is working in consumer goods with third-party manufacturing, that the Scope 3 emissions are really accounting for the larger part. So this is not only us in Stockholm, where it's really 99% of our emissions, but it's true for many other companies, and we can see it, of course, from the reports which are publicly available. So it makes very much sense to focus on Scope 3 emissions and focus the efforts to reduce these emissions in Scope 3. When we zoom into the details a bit, how it looks in Scope 3, there is tiny Scope 1 and 2 as well. So it's, of course, the materials we use in our products and the manufacturing of our products, and followed by the transportation. So we have transportation, it's different means of transportation such as sea cargo and on land. And of course, we have very detailed analysis, which is showing us which materials we have to prioritize and which manufacturing sites we have to prioritize in the actions and where we can achieve the biggest emission reductions. And this is back to my first point. This is very important to have a good data coming in, because even though, you might think, oh, what are these 100 grams more or less? When you multiply it by the product you are selling per year or you are purchasing per year, that's all kind of different story, right? So you always have to see the big picture. So, but as I mentioned, to discuss the result and really go to the details and make a sense check after you get your first results, that's a big help in being more accurate next time and doing the adjustment, and make sure that everybody in the team who is involved in the data collection gets the importance of the data. So Stokke committed to science-based target this year, and we have committed to reduce Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions aligned with the climate science, so with a 1.5 target. So we are now working on the reduction roadmap, and it's also important to say we are not reporting on publicly yet, but we will start as of next year. So the first report will be for the year of 2022. Yep. So I think I will stop here. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, please feel free to post them.
I think you might be on mute.
Yes, Anders, I think we don't hear the. No, maybe you can take back the control. Yeah, unfortunately, I cannot hear you.
There we go, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm sorry about that, everyone. I think, yeah, technology is not always on your side. I just want to say thank you so much for that very interesting presentation, Sonia. It was very interesting to hear about how you do it at Stokke. And also about how you kind of create a team and you have designated meeting points where you kind of work through this together. And yeah, seems like you're doing a great job. Since we're just a little bit over time, I think we'll head right to the Q&A. For those who want to stay for a few more minutes, feel free to do so. I'll just shoot off with a question to Sonia specifically. We have a question that says, so when you're uploading or working with big data and big files, it's sometimes hard to upload them because the files are so big. So how do you kind of handle and navigate that space?
Yeah, I have to say we don't have such a huge files yet. So it's still manageable within Excel. But for the logistics part, when we get the raw data for the next year, we will be working with Power BI just to have the raw data more compressed, because it was a huge amount of data. So I think Power BI is quite a good solution. I can recommend to use it also for data visualization after you have the results.
I see. And Abby, have you experienced anything like that? Any troubles with big data?
No, we haven't come across that issue yet.
Well, that's very good. I think, do we have more questions from the chat? Let me see. I don't believe so. I think also if you have any other questions, feel free to still type them in the Q&A chat, and then we'll make sure to answer you later on. And you can also, of course, email us if you have any further questions. So I think I want to finish off with just like asking one question from me. So your reduction targets, both of your reduction targets are very ambitious. So how have you yet identified where in your supply chain you have the biggest potential for reduction? And is the raw material extraction or refining process or transportation or manufacturing like one of those places where you feel like you can reduce the most emissions? So that was a question for both of you. Where in the supply chain can you reduce?
Do you want to go first, or?
I'm fine. Please go ahead.
Well, I think one of the I would say I don't know if it's positive, but one of the Crayon is an IT company, so we don't have, kind of the raw material challenges that other companies might have in terms of maybe like the Equinors or the Yaras that are coming in to reduce, because we are, kind of a digital company. So that helps in terms of around that scope 3 aspect of it. I think so where we are is trying to actually identify where try to increase our scope 3 and then also reduce that. But I think a lot of it is around kind of people and what they're doing in terms of, flights, in terms of waste. And then also so I don't think we have as much of the challenges, I would say, as Stoka or some of the other companies that have to deal with raw material in terms of joint targets.
And for us, you have seen our 60% of our emissions coming from the materials. So it's for sure something we are focusing very much on. So we want to go more into increasing the share of recycled materials in our products. And in production and logistics, we would like to focus on increasing the renewable energy. So luckily for us, the energy equals electricity. So that's the main focus in the production, and in logistics, of course, green fuels. We are working with some of the biggest logistic partners, so that might also help. They have their own targets and working towards reducing emissions as well.
Yeah, thank you both. Very interesting insights. I see that we have no more questions coming up, so I just want to say that this has been a very interesting session. Thanks to our speakers. I hope all of you have a better understanding of what Scope 3 reporting entails. And with that, I would also like to thank you all for attending the Scope 3 webinar. And if you have more questions for us, feel free to send us an email at info@CEMAsys.com. So with that, thank you and good luck to all of you with your Scope 3 reporting.